A new approach to end America's longest war. President Donald Trump promises victory, but with few details. Will it work? I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is the US's shifting strategy in Afghanistan. No more nation building, just killing terrorists. That's how Trump described his new strategy for finishing the war in Afghanistan. Security there has crumbled, the Taliban has surged, Daesh has gained a foothold, and Al-Qaeda hasn't gone away. In response, the self-professed problem solver says he's going against his instinct to pull out in order to put the US on the path to victory. Trump told troops they must now fight to win. But without explaining what winning looks like, it raises the question, what have soldiers been doing for the past 16 years? Obama's troop surge failed and peace talks have faltered. But could Trump be the president to end the war? And what do Afghans make of the plan? In a moment, I'll pose these questions to our panel. But first, this report from Randolph Nogel.
We will fight to win. From now on, victory will have a clear definition. Attacking our enemies, obliterating ISIS, crushing Al-Qaeda, preventing the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, and stopping mass terror attacks against America before they emerge.
For those who fought for those same goals for 15 years, most would say coming up short wasn't for a lack of trying. But proponents of another surge in U.S. troops say success may be closer than it appears. President Trump offered few details in his address, something his administration says is all part of the plan.
I think what the president has conveyed, and I agree wholeheartedly with him, is that we are not going to signal ahead what our plans are. The only way we can defeat an enemy that is as nimble and as cagey tactically as this enemy is we have to be as cagey and tactical as they are. And we've not been fighting that way.
After what were described as lengthy deliberations at Camp David, Trump said he returned convinced that a hasty withdrawal could create a power vacuum for Daesh and Al-Qaeda. At present, an estimated 8,400 American soldiers are stationed in Afghanistan. They make up the majority of the 13,000-strong international force responsible for training and advising the Afghan military. But it's been scarcely enough to hold off the Taliban, who by some estimates control or contest 40% of the country. And Trump wants help.
We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately.
Donald Trump's proposed approach of conventional military force and hard-nosed diplomacy with Pakistan resembles that of his predecessor, but some say there are few desirable alternatives. But if it didn't work then, why will it work now? A question in the minds of many who have followed the violent saga that is America's longest war. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Zalmay Khalilzad. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, and the UN. And also in Washington, Omar Samad. He's the former Afghan ambassador to Canada, France, and Belgium. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure having both of you on the program. Big news. Zalmay Khalilzad, let me start with you. They haven't announced the exact numbers, but it seems to be around 4,000. Does Afghanistan need this right now? Is it the right decision?
I believe it is the right decision in the broader context, meaning Afghanistan does need some additional military support in terms of the numbers that the commanders have asked for, some 4,000 to 5,000. In addition, there is a need for greater flexibility in terms of how that force will be used, the authority to be given to the commander. There is also a need for accelerating the buildup of Afghan capabilities. And there is also the need for a stronger policy, more effective, hopefully, policy in affecting Pakistani calculations, because Pakistan, as President Trump has said, has taken American money and has then supported the forces that are fighting the Americans in Afghanistan. The previous two presidents in the United States after 9/11 were not able to affect Pakistani policies fundamentally. We'll see how Pakistan reacts to a more tougher approach that President Trump has embraced. And also there are obviously issues inside Afghanistan politically that has to be dealt with in terms of reforms. And there are agreements now in place between the Afghan government and between with the Trump administration that the American assistance is based on some commitments that the Afghans have made. And that also will be important. So it is a difficult decision that has been made by President Trump. The alternative of abandoning Afghanistan was going to be more dangerous, he assessed, and his team. And we will have to see. It's a bold move on his part, alienating part of his base, perhaps. But he didn't want, during his watch, for Afghanistan to become back a sanctuary for terrorists as it was before 9/11. And we will have to just wait and see how the implementation goes and how the various actors react to it.
Yeah, alienating part of his base, also potentially alienating an ally in Pakistan. I want to talk about Pakistan in a few minutes' time as we broaden it out. But for the moment, let's stick with the kind of bilateral element here, the U.S. and Afghanistan. Ambassador Samad, 100,000 troops at the peak of the troop deployment under the Obama administration couldn't stabilize Afghanistan. What makes anyone think that an additional 4,000 to the few thousand that are currently there are going to do any better?
Well, the nature of the war back then was a bit different. Now the combat mission is in the hands of the Afghans almost entirely. The international community's presence, whether U.S., NATO, and others, is one of assisting, training, and mentoring, and so on. And I think it will make a difference as long as we take the whole situation into account. It's, first of all, not a black and white situation. It's not an easy one. Afghanistan is a complex country to begin with. We have seen almost 40 years of continued bloodshed and some kind of conflict of one nature or another in this country going on. The latest episode for the past 15, 16 years being the post-9/11 Afghanistan that has tried to rebuild itself while at the same time fighting those who are trying to spoil the situation out of their safe havens in Pakistan, mainly. But it's also a complex situation because of the region and the fact that today there are more actors that are interested and have vested interest or consider themselves as having an interest in Afghanistan under new conditions. And then the internal dynamics in Afghanistan itself is very fragile, in my opinion, and I think the president should have dealt a little bit more with that. He did allude to it, but I think that unless you put the internal dynamics in focus and make sure that fragility does not erode confidence and erode governance in Afghanistan, then you will not be able to make a lot of progress.
For specific, in terms of the internal dynamics, does President Ghani know what he's doing?
I think President Ghani is learning. I think it has taken there's a learning curve over the last 3 years. I think and I hope that both he and Dr. Abdullah, his partner in the unity government, will continue to focus on what really matters for Afghanistan, what is to the benefit of the country as a whole. I think that they should keep away from any type of gamesmanship that fractures the country along whether political or ethnic or regional lines. And I think that they should focus on reform and on good governance in Afghanistan. That is what the Afghans expect. And in order to stem the flow of what is called Taliban momentum, I think it's important to make sure that we provide services and we also provide justice in Afghanistan. I think that those are elements that are important. They're not part of nation building, as Mr. Trump alluded to. I think they're part of state building, and they're part of institution building in Afghanistan, and those two elements are very important.
Yeah, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks claim they're being marginalized under the current administration. An interesting internal dynamic. Let's take that quote. "We are not nation building again, we are killing terrorists," said President Trump. Ambassador Khalilzad, to Americans who are looking at their soldiers going to Afghanistan, when they look at, this has been 16 years now, The Onion, sometimes in satire, there's profound wisdom. They had a little piece about, oh, a young soldier is thrilled to do the same soldier duty route as his father 16 years ago. For those Americans who wonder, what are we doing in Afghanistan? How would you respond to the question of who are we fighting? Are Americans fighting the Taliban, who control 40% of the country? Are Americans fighting Daesh, who the US dropped the mother of all bombs on? Or both? Who?
Well, it has been a difficult situation, and there is frustration in the American body politic given the length of this war and the level of effort that has been made. America expected to have much more results, a lot more progress than we have in Afghanistan, although I think there has been progress. We tend to focus largely on negative part. You mentioned in asking Ambassador Samad that 100,000 didn't stabilize Afghanistan. How come 4,000 can do it? And the fact that the American commanders thought in 2011 or 12 that they needed 100,000 troops to prevent the Taliban from achieving their objective, and now they're asking for 4,000 to 5,000 to do the same, itself is a sign of progress. As was said before, the Afghans are doing the bulk of the fighting. I think President Obama, because of the domestic circumstances that I alluded to, he reduced the force dramatically, left a residual force that was too small. The military wanted what they're asking for now under President Obama, but he did not agree with it. President Trump is accommodating to the military's wishes. And at the same time, of course, there were these rules of engagement that President Obama imposed on the military, which is that they were not to attack the Taliban except in some specified and very limited circumstances. That the American war effort was going to be focused more on the Daesh and Al-Qaeda part. That also is going to change. But the Americans are fighting with the objective of preventing Afghanistan from going back to 2001. All those who are working against that objective, and that includes the Taliban, that includes the Afghani network, that includes remnants of Al-Qaeda, and that includes the new threat of Daesh, which, given its setbacks in Syria and Iraq, is trying to find a sanctuary in Afghanistan. Already it is active there. But the defeat or progress against these enemies require not only the domestic issues that were discussed earlier, and you said you'll come to it, but also dealing with the regional environment, particularly this intractable issue of sanctuaries in Pakistan, and how do you effect that? And I think that is a task that this president has taken on more frontally than was the case under President Obama and President Bush, although both tried to shape Pakistan's calculation, but what they tried did not work. We will have to see whether what President Trump will try, which will be more forceful in my judgment, based on what has been said, will work. And
so let me ask you about Pakistan.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, let me ask you about Pakistan. It's been brought up twice. Let's go for Pakistan right now. Now, Imran Khan has a lot of political capital right now because of what's happened internally in Pakistan. He's a man who could well be the next prime minister of the country. Here's what he had to say on Twitter. We fought 2 wars in Afghanistan at the US behest, paying heavy human and economic costs both times. We sacrificed 70,000 Pakistani lives in the US war on terror. Our economy suffered over $100 billion in losses. In addition, there were intangible costs on our society. Time for Pakistan to say never again. This should teach Pakistan once and for all a valuable lesson. Never to fight others' wars for the lure of dollars. We must also reject being made scapegoats for the policy failures of the US and India. Ambassador Khalil Zaid, does Imran Khan make any sense there, or is he deflecting from the fact that Pakistan supports the Afghan Taliban? Which one do you think is true?
I think it's the latter. He's seeking to deflect. We know that he's very close to the security and military establishment, and they have used them to weaken the elected government in the past, and he continues to play that role. And I think the fact is that Pakistan hasn't fought, especially in recent years, in support of the U.S. It has sought to frustrate the U.S. Objectives and to make money besides on the side, which is that the U.S. has provided a lot of assistance, military and economic, to Pakistan and Pakistani companies to allow the U.S. access to its infrastructure to take supplies to Afghanistan. But at the same time, Pakistan has been an arsonist, if you like, as well while presenting itself as a firefighter. It has allowed the Taliban and the Afghani network sanctuaries. They recover there, they train there, they get weapon supplies through there. Pakistani elements come with them inside Afghanistan. Some operations are carried out as almost a subcontract by ISI given to particular groups to attack particular targets. And the U.S. didn't know a lot about what the Pakistanis were doing in earlier periods because they were very clever in hiding what they were doing. But now it has become quite clear, and American military commanders and American leaders have become much more aware. And President Trump, as I said before, more frontally is focused on it than was the case earlier.
So then let me ask Omar Samad, why the specific focus on Pakistan if, fine, a lot of this may be true, but others are also getting involved. The Taliban themselves say Moscow is giving them weapons. The Iranians are getting involved. Afghanistan, as always, is being a sort of proxy battleground for multiple powers. Why is President Trump going after the Pakistanis only when other people are also getting down and dirty and maybe funding the opposition?
Well, Pakistan mainly, I think, is because of the history of the past 20, 25 years, if you look at it. And I think Ambassador Khalilzad pointed to that correctly. These are the facts on the ground. These are the realities that Afghans have been facing for the past 16 years and even before that. So we do see a consistency with Pakistani so-called strategy. Some people call it, a strategy that is based on fighting India and turning Afghanistan into a battlefield. Others think that it is part of a vision for using extremist and radicalism that incorporates terrorism. And so whatever it is, Pakistan has unfortunately been the core issue as far as Afghanistan's security is concerned. Now, this does not mean that others are not interested or others are not also involved or engaged. Some positively, some negatively, some are new, have new games to play. And I think that since Daesh has appeared on the scene, we are seeing some new alignments and realignments emerging in the region, which is why this is becoming more complex. And I think this is why President Trump should have probably spent a little bit more time also sending some more clearer messages to Moscow, to Beijing, to New Delhi, which he did to some extent, and maybe even indirectly to Tehran. I think those capitals will continue to play an important role. Let's hope that that role is not the role of a spoiler, that they are constructive, as they have been since 2001, when the Taliban were ousted from Afghanistan. Most of these countries have played mostly a constructive role in Afghanistan. We would like that to continue. So that requires American engagement. Diplomatically, I think President Trump and his team need to really make some concerted efforts and hard decisions on how to bolster U.S. diplomatic mission in regards to Afghanistan, especially in those capitals.
Zama Khalilzad, you're nodding in agreement. Is it happening, or is President Trump going it alone and doing this unilaterally? Is he working with his partners or the regional players?
I think he will be working with obviously the NATO partners to begin with, because they have a presence also militarily in Afghanistan, and they have committed to doing more, and they will do more, in my judgment, in the aftermath of the announcements from Washington. Second is the president is reaching out to a new or enhanced partnership with India to do burden sharing in Afghanistan. Because of the frustration, I think, of waiting for Pakistan to change policy and keep India at arm's length, or not to take full advantage of India's willingness to help, fearing that that would antagonize Pakistan. But now I think there is a belief that that strategy failed, so let's get India to bear some of the burdens. With regard to the other powers in the region, Iran and Russia, I think the president did not talk about those. Would have been worth talking about them. It seems to me, at least, that recently there has been a shift to more negative policy on the part of both in Afghanistan. In the case of the Russians, it has to do with the shift in the balance of power on the ground, which hopefully this new American strategy could affect, which is that the Taliban were getting stronger and ISIS was acquiring a presence, and the Russians, U.S. relations also have their problems, that the Russians were adjusting by reaching out to the Taliban in part to use them against Daesh, perhaps, and also to gain leverage vis-a-vis the United States. And in the case of Iran, I think similarly, there is the issue of the shift in the balance. The Taliban were becoming more important. So like Russia, Iran wanted to engage with a growing or a power, and at the same time, the problem of Daesh. But there is also the issue with regard to Iran, not only of the U.S. increased hostility, but also the water issue between Iran and Afghanistan. The Afghan government has been talking about regulating the water supplies from Afghanistan to Iran, and that has had the Iranians concerned that, and I think they have reacted negatively to that by perhaps creating circumstances in that part of Afghanistan that could make it difficult for Afghanistan to build dams that it wants to do to affect the water supplies from Afghanistan to Iran.
And that's quite illuminating, looking at some of the issues related to the neighbors and the reasons for why they might be doing what they are doing. Before we end this, I have to ask both of you about a very crucial element of this, the fact that there's no timetable. Now, Barack Obama had a timetable. He was criticized for it. Omar Samad, people were like, oh, you said you're going to leave on Sunday? Well, the Taliban will just come back on Monday, right? Major criticism of the timetable. No timetable from President Trump, but isn't that in some ways worse, because this commits the U.S. to an endless, forever war, an endless quagmire if the Taliban and Daesh and others can scupper the U.S. and their plans and just give them a bloody nose every so often. It's going to be an endless war, isn't it, sir?
No, I don't think so. I think it's smart not to announce any dates. I think it's smart not to even announce any numbers. I think that the less you talk about what you're going to do, but make sure that you have tools in the toolkit to make sure that you change the situation for the better, that there is a strategy, and that there are ingredients of this strategy that touch upon all these different things that we talked about. I also don't want to forget by saying that stability in Afghanistan also means political stability. And political stability means making sure that the Afghan people and their democracy that they're trying to build functions properly. I think this is very, very important, because it's within that context that the Taliban might one day find a way to be incorporated within the Afghan body politics. And that could be a solution. Otherwise, we will be fighting this forever over whatever terms are used, and this will become a proxy battlefield. And we want to avoid that. So I think that tactics matter, and you don't have to discuss everything all the time and share it with your enemy.
Very finally, Zalmay Khalilzad, no timetable. How long would you recommend that the U.S. keeps their troops in Afghanistan?
Well, we have been in Germany and Korea since the Second World War, and we have had a presence in Turkey for a very long time. If the American people believe that the cause is important and that the administration or the American government knows what it is doing and has confidence in the strategy, then why have a timetable? Timetables tend to I see the logic for domestic purposes, and it can also be used to motivate the Afghan government to take the steps that it should. But it has a big downside, which is that the enemy can wait you out, and therefore I support not putting a timetable. That doesn't mean it's an open-ended commitment. The government of the United States can always internally review, make different decisions, but you don't have to say it at the beginning of a new policy when that new policy will end, which is the mistake, in my judgment, that President Obama made.
Well, it was great having the opportunity to tap into your expertise, pick both your brains. Ambassadors Zalmay Khalilzad and Omar Samed, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Australia's unlikely constitutional crisis. Will a dilemma over dual citizenship bring down the government? And erasing atrocities. YouTube automatically deletes some violent videos that may have wiped out evidence of war crimes. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Australia is in the middle of an unusual crisis, one that involves the secret lives of politicians, so secret they themselves didn't realize they had them. With each week comes another revelation that yet another parliamentarian has broken the law by unknowingly having dual citizenship. It started by prompting the resignation of a couple of opposition senators. Before long, it swirled to take in members of the ruling coalition, including the Deputy Prime Minister. And now it's gone all the way to the High Court as people challenge the Constitution in a fight for their political lives.
Australian politics is having an identity crisis.
I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand. Needless to say, I was shocked to receive this information. Neither I nor my parents have ever had any reason to believe that I may be a citizen of any other country.
Barnaby Joyce is now one of 7 members of Parliament who've been caught unawares about their dual citizenship status. Larissa Waters was born in Canada but grew up in Australia and didn't know she was still considered Canadian. Matt Canavan says his mother signed him up for Italian citizenship without his knowledge. And Nick Xenophon found out less than a fortnight ago that he's a British overseas citizen.
Man ironi dige nista.
That is, I'm not an Iranian citizen, and I like to say, then ime Elenas Kyprosipikos.
Which is, I'm not a Greek or Cypriot citizen.
That's all we have to say to you. Thank you.
We're feeling much more Aussie than our colleagues today.
Section 44 of the Constitution prevents anyone from running for Parliament if they're a citizen of another country, or if they're entitled to the same rights as a citizen or subject of another country. The law is 116 years old. The Australian Electoral Commission's Guide for Political Candidates clearly says you cannot nominate if you are disqualified by Section 44 of the Constitution. Some of the politicians caught up in this crisis say they've never had a reason to question their nationality. The matter for 5 of them is now before the High Court, and it will determine if they can stay in their jobs. The decision could change the fate of the 45th Parliament, because the coalition government holds a 1-seat majority, and one of those seats is held by the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce. Australia promotes itself as a great multicultural nation.
'Cause we are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come.
The latest census data shows that 49% of Australians were either born overseas or have a parent who was born outside the country. If the law stays the same, it could rule out many of them from ever running for office. Changing it would require a referendum. But for now, political representation in 21st century Australia will continue to be determined by a century-old clause. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now by the independent South Australian senator who's found himself caught up in this mess. It's Nick Xenophon in Melbourne. Good to have you on the program. So you're not among the 5 in the eye of the storm at the moment, but you are listed and you're under scrutiny. Now, help me understand this. You renounced your Greek Cypriot citizenship and then, oops, you found out you're also a British citizen. How did that happen?
Well, firstly, I will be in the eye of the storm. My understanding is that when the Parliament resumes in about 10 days' time, there will be a motion of the Senate, of the Australian Senate, to refer me off to the High Court, along with Fiona Nash, Senator Nash, who's a cabinet minister in the coalition government. So my father is from Cyprus, my mother's from Greece. Before the 2007 election, I undertook the usual steps of renunciation, even though I've never had citizenship of Greece or Cyprus, never wanted to either. But it seems that because my father migrated to Australia in 1951 when Cyprus was still a British colony, and the irony is he migrated to Australia so he could get away from British rule, there's a very peculiar, a rare peculiarity that basically says my father has given me British colonial citizenship, which is a kind of 3rd or 4th class citizenship. The irony is that anyone in Cyprus who was in Cyprus at the time of independence in 1960 automatically lost that British colonial status.
So, as things stand, you're under scrutiny. This has caused big trouble in Parliament. Parliament is almost paralysed as a result of this. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight it or are you going to resign?
No, I'm not resigning, because I've got very good legal advice that says that I should be fine when it goes to the High Court. I won't, of course, preempt anything that the High Court of Australia, the highest court of the land, will be doing on this. They're sitting as a court of disputed returns. It's an issue that I'm taking legal advice, and to borrow from that British phrase, I'm going to keep calm and carry on.
You see? Your loyalties are under scrutiny now when you said that. Now, seriously, do you believe that the law needs to be changed? Does it need to be changed? Is this a silly old law that needs to go away?
Well, this is part of the Constitution of Australia, and the Constitution has only been changed a handful of times since 1901. It's a 116-year-old document, and the position is this: if the Constitution needs to be changed, it needs to be put to the people of Australia at a referendum. There are 6 states here, and a majority of people in a majority of states have to agree to support a change to the Constitution. I think at this stage we need to see what the High Court will determine. This will actually be the case on the interpretation of Section 44. The last major case was 25 years ago, and I think that the law on this will evolve since that time. And in my case, you say I'm under scrutiny. Well, as soon as I found out from the UK Home Office, when I made inquiries, because I had media inquiries, I put my hand up and said, let's get on with it, send me to the High Court so we can work out what's going on. But it's pretty crazy because I know my loyalties aren't to any other country in the world other than Australia, and I never want to have and never have had any other form of citizenship than Australian citizenship. So I know where I stand and how I feel about my country, but it's up to the wise women and men on the High Court to sort out what my fate will be.
Nick Xenophon, good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Let's bring in two new guests now to debate the ramifications of this situation. From Sydney, we're joined by David Oldfield. He's a former Member of Parliament and co-founder of the right-wing One Nation Party. And replacing Nick in Melbourne is Jack Lattimore, a journalist who writes for Indigenous X and The Guardian. As Nick said, this is the Constitution. It's very difficult to change a Constitution. It's not any old law. With that in mind, despite all of that, David Oldfield, this was written 117 years ago. Times have changed. Section 44 is causing trouble and Parliament's essentially paralysed. Is it time to change the Constitution, David?
Well, I don't see really why the Constitution needs to be changed. I mean, I can understand why it was changed in the past. That makes sense. But on this occasion, the Australian Constitution requires that people do not have loyalty to another country. Now, we've got some issues with that because we find some people apparently have loyalty without actually knowing that they have it. And clearly that's a nonsense. But if you're a person who has been born in a country other than Australia and you have failed to renounce the citizenship of that country, well, you know, that's a matter where there is the question of where your loyalties lie. That's what the Constitution predicted and how it was enacted, and that makes sense. By the same token, if you're somebody like Barnaby Joyce and you are a citizen of another country just by virtue of the fact that your father was born there and you're unaware of it, well, of course, that's ridiculous.
So, David, yes, you have the Deputy Prime Minister. He's not been sent as some sort of Manchurian candidate by New Zealand, you know, to conduct a coup d'etat, right? He didn't know. Yet the implications of this are as if somebody was almost a spy or somebody was working for a foreign government. Given that the government could fall, the Prime Minister could lose his job. With all of that in mind, are people making too much of a big deal of this, David?
Well, look, I think so, absolutely. And look, the reality is that if the Prime Minister fell, so to speak, the Deputy Prime Minister wouldn't become the Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce is a member of the National Party. They're a coalition partner. If something happened to our current Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, who is in theory a New Zealand citizen, simply wouldn't become the Prime Minister. It would be another person from the current Prime Minister's party. But all of that aside, there's no question that there's a Manchurian candidate taking place here. It's just one of those unfortunate, silly things where New Zealand has a law that impacts a person who is not even aware of it. I mean, Barnaby Joyce is a fifth-generation Australian from Tamworth, where both his mother and his grandmother were born. So, you know, it's a silly situation. Do we need to change the Constitution to correct that? What we really need to find out is what the High Court ultimately deems as appropriate. If the High Court comes back and says that Barnaby Joyce is a citizen of New Zealand because his father was born there and because New Zealand say he is, well, then I would suggest we need to change the Constitution. If, on the other hand, they come back and say that Barnaby Joyce is not a citizen of New Zealand, he was unaware of it, and it is a matter for New Zealand rather than Australia, well, the Constitution is fine as it is.
Jack, does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, I think everyone's waiting to find out now what the High Court comes up with in October. It really comes down to what the interpretation of the law, whether it's the rule of law, the letter of the law, or the spirit of the law. From where I sit and what I'm hearing through the work that we do, a lot of people are having a bit of a laugh about this, at the hypocrisy of it. Not so long ago, the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was espousing that he abided by the rule of law. He was trying to show strong leadership. This was his slogan, the rule of law. Now we find ourselves in a position where he is somewhat urging that the spirit of the law be followed in these matters that jeopardise some of the members of his party.
And so how do you think this is going to turn out? And how do you think it's going to evolve as we get to that crucial date?
Imran,
OK, come in, David, and then we'll go back to Jack. Come in, David.
Imran, I was just saying that, interestingly, there's no real excuse for any of this, especially for people who were born overseas, as opposed to Barnaby Joyce's situation, the Deputy Prime Minister. There's no real excuse because my recollection of how this came down is that it first occurred in a practical sense about 20 years ago when a lady named Heather Hill was excluded from being elected because after the election, when she was supposed to go into the Senate, this is back in 1998, it was found that she was actually still a citizen of the UK. Now, as far as I'm aware, she was the first person that ever had that happen. It was found she was a dual citizen and she was excluded from taking up her seat in the Senate, and somebody else had to take her place. So at least in the last 20 years, we've known this is an issue. At the time when that happened, it was suggested that there were as many as 50 people in the Parliament who may have actually been in the same position as her, but nothing was ever done about those people. All of a sudden, 20 years later, somebody's doing something about it.
OK, Jack, I want you to have a listen to Julie Bishop, the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs, talking about New Zealand, and this has been an extraordinary spat now with the neighbours. Let's have a little listen and I'll ask you a question off the back of that.
Bill Shorten has sought to use a foreign political party to raise serious allegations in a foreign parliament designed to undermine confidence in the Australian government. Bill Shorten has serious questions to answer. This is highly unethical at least, but more importantly puts at risk the relationship between the Australian government and the New Zealand government.
OK, so Jack, it now influences foreign relations, especially relations with a neighbour, New Zealand. This sounds bizarre in many ways. So the allegations that a Labour MP had somehow sort of colluded with the Kiwis next door, has Australian politics lost its mind?
Yes, it has lost the mind has gone since 2010. You know, anyone following it has seen prime ministers come and go and be replaced within their party, you know, quite frequently. In this case, Julie Bishop and the party that she represents, the Liberal Party, it's classic deflection. Those allegations are fairly serious, and they've been shrugged off, essentially, by the Labor Party, the opposition. And again, in today's paper, the Liberals were out attempting to smear the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, with being a socialist, which is absolutely absurd. He is considered by many to be in the right wing of the Labor Party. But yes, you know, to answer your question, in general, Australian politics is on an uneven keel at the moment.
And what's going to happen as we get to the 10th of October, Jack?
I think a reasonable and rational approach will be taken by the High Court. Now, whether I agree with that or not is beside the point. I think that they, although they'll look at each of these cases individually and look at the merits of the circumstances involved, I would say, you know, with the likes of Barnaby Joyce, he'll maintain his position. There might be a question over Malcolm Roberts, the One Nation senator, and there may be a question, well, they're already, Scott Ludlam has gone. And, you know, they're saying that there might be a question over Joyce, but, you know, it's still fairly unclear. After October, I think we'll just basically be in the same position as we're at the moment. We won't go toward an election, I don't think. Some people are tipping a later by-elections in late 2017, 2018. I can't see that happening, but yeah, just the status quo will be maintained, I would say.
OK. Jack Lattimore, David Oldfield, and earlier Nick Xenophon. Good to have all of you on the programme. Thanks so much for joining us. Many people worry what you post online stays there forever. But what happens when the opposite is true? In an effort to protect viewers from violent videos, YouTube has been deleting clips and channels showing atrocities in Syria. In some cases, those videos may have been the only evidence out there of war crimes. From indiscriminate barrel bombs to chemical weapons attacks, YouTube has become an unintended hub of evidence, and some of the original uploaders have since been killed. YouTube admits the company may have made mistakes and says it has now reinstated some videos, but there's no guarantee that all clips can be retrieved, and the years of research in tagging and organizing the footage is gone forever. Activists worry without this video proof, crimes may go unpunished. Well, my guest today has been leading an effort to organize video evidence of crimes in Syria. From Amsterdam, I'm joined by Elliot Higgins. He's the founder of open source investigation website Bellingcat. He's also a research associate at King's College London and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Elliot, good to have you on the program. So it's you versus YouTube at the moment. Have you won, given that they've reinstated these videos? Is it all okay now?
Well, I think really this is an unfortunate side effect of their attempts to deal with jihadi and ISIS propaganda rather than any kind of battle between myself and YouTube. But it does raise some very important issues. YouTube is being used now by a lot of groups in Syria to document war crimes and atrocities, and there's other groups that are using this information to put together cases such as Bellingcat. And we found in the last few weeks that more and more of these accounts are being shut down, and this is a pretty major problem for those of us trying to track what's happening in the conflict.
But do you have complete understanding of the context? I mean, do you have sympathy with them, given that, for example, just a few years ago, circa 2014, it was very normal to stumble upon this kind of atrocity porn or even Daesh videos. I remember on Twitter and elsewhere, things like the James Foley beheading were just appearing on people's feeds. So do you understand that they're trying to legitimately tackle a real problem, but you guys are perhaps unfortunate collateral damage sometimes, as the algorithms and AI can't really distinguish between the two?
Yes, and I think really the James Foley execution was a watershed moment where people started taking these videos a lot more seriously, and it probably led to what we're seeing today. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people kind of being caught in the crossfire. We've seen one big issue is they're applying these new rules and this new algorithm to videos that were uploaded 3 or 4 years ago. And in the case of many Syrian opposition groups and people documenting this crisis, they've uploaded thousands, if not tens of thousands of videos since 2013 and 2012, and you just need a few strikes for your entire account to be gone and all those videos to disappear. So I think in this attempt to control this jihadi content, they've kind of overlooked a few issues such as that, as retroactively punishing people for videos that were uploaded years ago.
Yeah, I want to move away a little bit from YouTube per se and the mistakes they have made to talk more generally about your work. And you have done some tremendous work, whether it was in terms of MH17, the failed coup here, the Khan Sheikhoun chemical attack. A lot of people go to your site. A lot of people have learned the value of open source information, that you don't have to conduct these mega investigations, or you don't have to rely on people conducting secret investigations. It's all out there. It's just how you compile it, right? And they go to people like you. Tell me how important this is to be used as evidence of war crimes. I mean, I see you're in The Hague. Is that why you're there right now? Are you making some sort of case in terms of Syria?
Well, at the moment, I'm going to be visiting the International Criminal Court to show them some of the work Bellingcat's done using open source information. They've actually been very proactive about looking into this area. And at the start of this month, they actually put an arrest warrant for a Libyan commander who featured in several execution videos posted on social media. And that's very significant because this is one of the first examples of social media posts being used by the International Criminal Court to draw up these arrest warrants. So already we're seeing a demonstration of how this is being used. Really, we've seen in the last probably even just a couple of years, international organisations interested in justice and accountability, like the ICC, using open source information, social media posts to start informing their work. And I think moving forwards, we're only going to see more and more of that happening.
A lot of people cited Bellingcat when it came to MH17. We saw RT and the likes pushing back, questioning a lot of your research and work. Power systems, governments don't just roll over and die if they have a competing narrative. Tell me how much pressure you've come across or you've faced because of the work you've done.
Well, in the case of Russia, I mean, we've been targeted by the same hackers who targeted the DNC and resulted in the Podesta email leaks. We've been criticised by the Russian Ministry of Defence and Russian Foreign Ministry. In fact, when the Russian Foreign Ministry attacked our work, I emailed them and asked them to explain what evidence they have, and they sent us what were plagiarised blog posts. They stole some stuff offline and sent it to us as their evidence. So, you know, their criticism really doesn't have much to any legs to stand on. You know, but we've faced criticism by Russian media organisations. You know, we get targeted in various ways. People have tried to access our emails because of the work we've been doing. So we do come under pressure from the Russian government in particular because of the work we're doing.
And as we bring this back to the beginning, is it possible to balance those needs between protecting the public from coming across egregious stuff like the beheading of people or children and so on, that's usually posted by bad groups like Daesh, and stuff that is legitimately needed out there to document atrocities by belligerents in a conflict? Can those be balanced by social media and by video outlets such as YouTube?
I think there's a possibility that can be done. It does require YouTube and other social media organisations to speak to groups who are working on this kind of content. And they have been, to be fair, some of these organisations have been doing this. But there is this kind of grey area. It's like the Libyan execution videos. Those videos were posted on Facebook. Now, if those videos had been deleted immediately, people wouldn't have found them and they wouldn't be used in this ICC case. So it's kind of navigating that grey area. And also the area of archiving these videos. There are organisations such as the Syrian Archive who are trying to archive these videos, but they're only able to do a fraction of videos, and what might seem relevant now might not be relevant in 15 to 20 years' time to a case that might come up. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of videos uploaded from the Syrian conflict, and we need to think seriously about how we can preserve that as evidence of war crimes.
Elliot Higgins, great to talk to you. All the best with your work. Thanks so much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.